they auctioned the fat girl like cattle. Now she's mine, and we want payback.
The town was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and where nothing ever stayed a secret for long.
For some people, this meant a tight-knit community, but for others it meant being trapped under a constant watchful eye that judged every move, every word, every appearance. Among those who struggled most under the town's gaze was a young woman named Amina Burr. She was gentle, kind, and intelligent. But the moment she stepped outside, she felt invisible in one way and painfully visible in another. People would stare at her body first, whisper about her weight, and dismiss everything else about her as unimportant. It was as if her personality, her dreams, her laughter, and her tears didn't matter at all, only her appearance mattered. And in that harsh measure, she always felt like she fell short. Amina had learned to live quietly with the cruel whispers. At school, at the market, even at family gatherings, she noticed how people's eyes lingered on her in judgment, desperation. When she tried to make friends, she was often overlooked. Children in her neighborhood would sometimes imitate her, laughing behind her back, while adults made helpful comments about dieting, exercise, or how she should take better care of herself. The messages were everywhere. She did not belong, she was too much, she was a problem. The words cut her deeply, though she rarely showed it. She had mastered the art of smiling through the sting, of walking tall even when she felt like shrinking into herself. But inside, the hurt was always there, like a quiet shadow following her wherever she went. Then came the day that would change everything, though at the time she could not have imagined it. It started as a normal afternoon in the town square, where people gathered to sell and buy goods, share news, and exchange gossip. Amina had gone there simply to pick up some items for her family. She carried a small bag, walked with careful steps, and hoped to pass unnoticed. Unfortunately, some people in the crowd had other ideas. They were known for cruelty, for taking pleasure in humiliating anyone who did not fit their narrow vision of normal. On this day, they decided to target Amina. At first, it seemed like a prank, a cruel joke whispered between friends. But as the murmurs grew louder, the whispers turned into shouts, and the joke turned into a spectacle. People began to gather around, not to stop what was happening, but to watch. Amina felt their eyes on her, cold and merciless, stripping away every bit of confidence she had built over the years. Burst. Her heart pounded, and for the first time she felt completely powerless. Then came the unthinkable moment. They began mocking her openly, comparing her body to objects and animals in ways that made her skin crawl and her chest tighten with shame. They laughed as if she were nothing more than a thing to be examined, ranked, and discarded. One cruel voice suggested something even worse. A cruel act disguised as a joke that left her stunned. They began treating her as though she could be auctioned, like she was property, rather than a human being. The words rang in her ears, sharp and unforgiving, and for a moment she felt frozen. Her voice, which usually trembled with nervousness around criticism, was now trapped inside her. Around her the crowd grew. Some laughed. Some just stared, unsure of how to act. No one stepped forward to help, and that was perhaps the most painful part. She felt isolated, not just physically, but emotionally, as if everyone she knew had turned their back on her in that moment. She wanted to disappear, to melt into the pavement, to escape the world entirely. Tears threatened to spill, but she forced them back. She had cried too many times before over people's cruelty, and she could not bear the thought of letting them see that they had won. In that moment of terror and humiliation, something inside Amina began to stir. Not a loud roar, not an immediate fight, but a quiet, stubborn spark. She realized that while she could not control the actions of those around her, she could control her own. She could choose not to let them define her, even if they tried to humiliate her publicly. She could choose to survive this moment with dignity, even if it felt impossible. It was a small thought, but it was enough to anchor her, to give her a thread to hold on to while the crowd jeered. Despite her fear, she noticed someone in the crowd who did not join the laughter. A man, standing a little apart, watched with calm eyes. He did not mock her, he did not whisper cruel words, and he did not look away. His gaze was steady, observing the scene without judgment, without fear, and without cruelty. For the first time that day, Amina felt a tiny flicker of hope. She did not know him, had never spoken to him, but his presence reminded her that not everyone was against her. There were still people in the world who could see her as more than her body, as more than the cruel labels that others forced upon her. The crowd continued their mockery for several more minutes, the noise swelling like a storm. But Amina began to focus on breathing through the panic. Inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Each breath was a small act of resistance. Each step she took to hold herself upright was a refusal to let them break her completely. Her legs shook, her hands trembled, and her heart raced, but she was not ready to surrender. She clung to the thought that one day she would move past this moment, that one day she would show the world that she was so much more than their cruel jokes and shallow opinions. Eventually the crowd began to scatter, perhaps bored, perhaps distracted, perhaps sensing the quiet defiance growing inside her. Amina remained where she was, her face wet with tears, her body trembling, but her spirit still intact. The man who had watched silently approached her slowly. He did not speak immediately. He simply walked beside her, a silent presence, offering protection without words. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the chaos she had just endured, and she realized that she was not as alone as she had thought. That day marked a turning point, though Amina did not know it yet. She had faced public humiliation in its most extreme form and had survived. She had endured cruelty that could have destroyed her, and yet she was still standing. And though the road ahead would be long, painful, and full of obstacles, she had learned something invaluable. Even in the darkest moments, there is the possibility of light.
Even when the world seems to be against you, there are those who see you, who recognize your humanity, and who will stand beside you without judgment. As Amina walked home that evening, still shaken but somehow stronger, she began to make a silent promise to herself.
She would not let this moment define her. She would not let the cruelty of others determine her self-worth. She would survive, she would heal, and she would rise. And one day she would show everyone, not through anger, not through revenge, but through the strength of her character and the depth of her spirit, that she was so much more than they could ever imagine. In the quiet of her room that night, with only her thoughts for company, Amina allowed herself to cry. But these were not cries of defeat. They were cries of release, of letting go of the shame that did not belong to her. She understood, in a way she had never understood before, that her true worth was not measured by the eyes of the cruel or the whispers of the envious. Her worth was in her heart, in her resilience, and in her ability to rise even when the world tried to push her down. And so, the first chapter of her journey ended, not with victory, but with survival, and with the faintest spark of hope that one day she would rewrite the story of her life. One day she would move from being the target of ridicule to being a symbol of strength, courage, and dignity. One day the world would see her as she truly was, a young woman with dreams, intelligence, and a heart capable of incredible kindness and bravery. After the terrible day in the town square, Amina felt both exhausted and strangely alert. Her body ached from standing for so long under the weight of humiliation, but her mind raced even more. She kept thinking about the man who had watched quietly, who had not laughed or whispered insults, who had simply stood there, calm and observant. She didn't know why, but his presence had made a difference. Somehow, Just knowing someone saw her as more than her appearance had given her a small sense of strength. She did not speak to him that day, and in truth, she had not even thought she could, but deep inside, she knew she wanted to. The next day, as she went about her chores and tried to return to her usual routines, she noticed the man again. He appeared to be coincidentally near the market where she sometimes shopped. Or maybe, she wondered quietly, it was not coincidence at all. There was a carefulness about him, a patience in the way he moved, as if he understood something about the world that others did not. He didn't approach her immediately. Instead, he gave her space, letting her feel safe rather than pressured. In a life where people often judged her harshly, even small acts of patience and consideration felt like rare treasures. Eventually, he found a way to speak to her. It was not loud or dramatic. He simply said, "Are you okay?" The question itself was so simple, so ordinary, yet it carried a weight that surprised Amina. But it wasn't mocking. It wasn't pity. It doesn't judgment. It was genuine concern. She wanted to shake her head and walk away. She had spent so long protecting herself from people that she did not know how to trust anyone. But there was something about him that felt different. Slowly, cautiously, Amina nodded. She did not speak at first, afraid that her words might tremble or that she might cry in front of him. But the man did not push her. He simply waited, silently acknowledging her presence without rushing her. That small patience began to chip away at the walls she had built around herself. It was the first time in a long time that someone had treated her as a person, not as a problem, not as a target for ridicule. Over the next few weeks, their interactions grew. They met occasionally in the market or on quiet streets where no one else seemed to notice them. He never forced conversation. He never made jokes at her expense. Instead, he asked simple questions about her day, about her family, about her dreams.
At first, Amina gave short answers. She was cautious, careful not to reveal too much.
But slowly, the safety in his presence made her begin to open up. She found herself speaking about things she had never told anyone else. Her love for books, her secret dreams of traveling, her desire to help others who had been treated unfairly. The man, whose name was Rami, listened without judgment. He never dismissed her experiences, and he never suggested that she should change for anyone. Instead, he acknowledged her pain and encouraged her strengths. He reminded her gently that no one had the right to define her worth, that true strength came from within, and that her kindness and intelligence mattered far more than her appearance. These words, simple as they were, became like a balm to Amina's wounded spirit. One day, as they walked together through the quiet streets of the town, Amina spoke about the auction-like humiliation she had suffered in the market. She described how it had felt to be treated like an object, stripped of dignity in front of the crowd. Her voice trembled as she spoke, but Rami did not flinch.
He did not offer platitudes or empty promises.
He simply listened, nodding in understanding, letting her tell her story fully. That act alone, of being heard without judgment, was powerful. It was the first time she felt validated in years. Rami encouraged her to see that her response to cruelty did not have to be hatred or revenge. Instead, he suggested she focus on rebuilding herself, on reclaiming her sense of dignity and self-respect. The world may be cruel, he said, but that does not mean you have to be small.
Stand tall not to prove them wrong, but to prove to yourself that you are stronger than their opinions. His words struck a chord deep within her.
For so long, she had believed that others' cruelty reflected her worth. Now she began to realize that the problem was never her. It had always been theirs. As the weeks turned into months, Amina began to notice changes within herself. The whispers in the street still existed. The stares still came. but they no longer held the same power over her. She started speaking up more confidently, sharing her thoughts in small gatherings, and expressing herself without fear of ridicule. She even began small acts of defiance against the unfair judgments, like participating in town events she had previously avoided or volunteering to help others. Each small victory, though seemingly insignificant to the world, felt monumental to her. Rami's support was quiet but consistent. He never sought recognition or gratitude. He simply showed up, offering his presence and listening ear, helping her understand that she was not defined by the cruelty of others. Together, they developed a rhythm of trust. She began sharing her fears openly with him, and he shared wisdom from his own life experiences, not to dominate or teach, but to guide. The companionship they formed was rare, built on mutual respect and understanding rather than pity or dependence. One afternoon, as they sat on a quiet bench watching children play in the distance, Amina realized something important. She did not feel the shame she had felt that day in the market. She did not feel the helplessness that had trapped her for so long. For the first time, she understood that healing was not about forgetting the cruelty, but about reclaiming power over her own emotions and responses. She began to see herself not as a victim, but as someone who had endured pain and survived it. That survival, she realized, was the beginning of strength. But even as she grew stronger, Amina knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. The people who had humiliated her were still in the town. Their whispers and stares could not be completely ignored. The fear of being judged again lingered like a shadow, waiting for the smallest sign of weakness. Yet with Rami's presence, she felt braver. But she knew that she did not have to face the world alone. She had someone who saw her, respected her, and believed in her, even when others did not. This growing sense of trust also gave Amina the courage to begin thinking about the future. For so long she had focused only on surviving the day, on avoiding humiliation, on hiding herself. Now, she began imagining possibilities she had never allowed herself to dream of before. She imagined traveling beyond the town, pursuing education she had previously thought impossible, and using her experiences to help others who were struggling under cruelty. Each new dream felt fragile, but it also felt powerful. The first time she was dreaming, not just to escape the world, but to change it.
One evening, as the sun set behind the mountains that framed the town, Amina reflected on how far she had come.
She remembered the fear, the humiliation, and the hopelessness she had felt in the market, and she remembered Rami, the quiet stranger who had intervened, who had seen her humanity, who had shown her that kindness existed even in a world that could be cruel. She realized that sometimes help came not in grand gestures but in small, consistent acts of recognition and respect. It was these small acts that could change a life forever. By the end of Part 2, Amina had begun a transformation. The seeds of trust, self-respect, and courage were taking root in her heart. She was not yet fully healed, and the scars of the past were still visible. But she had begun to reclaim her life. And with Rami by her side, she started to understand a vital truth, that real strength came not from revenge or anger, but from building yourself up, standing firm in the face of cruelty, and allowing yourself to trust and accept support from those who truly cared. In the quiet of her room that night, Amina wrote in her journal, a small habit she had begun to cope with the past. She wrote about her fears, her small victories, and the man who had shown her the first glimmer of hope, Bess. And as she closed the journal, she felt a quiet determination settle in her heart. She would continue to heal. She would continue to grow. And one day she would rise so strongly that the people who had once mocked her would see not a target, but a woman who had faced adversity and come out stronger on the other side. After months of quiet courage and careful trust, Amina began to notice real changes in herself. She had endured humiliation, cruelty, and isolation for so long that at first it was hard to believe she could ever feel safe or confident. But slowly, piece by piece, she started to rebuild her life. The process was not instant, and it was far from easy. Some days were filled with fear and doubt, when she would feel the whispers of the town like invisible chains around her, threatening to pull her back into old insecurities. Other days, however, brought small victories that reminded her of her own strength, and these moments became the foundation of her renewed self-confidence.
One of the first steps in her healing was learning to speak openly about her feelings.
For years, she had hidden behind polite smiles and quiet nods, afraid to let anyone see the depth of her pain. Now, with Rami's steady presence and encouragement, she began to talk. She shared memories of past humiliation, the moments when her self-esteem had been crushed, and the dreams she had once buried because she believed she didn't deserve them. Rami listened patiently, never interrupting or dismissing her experiences. This act of being truly heard was transformative. For the first time, Amina felt validated, understood, and accepted for who she truly was, not for what others thought she should be. As she shared her story, she also began reflecting on the strength she had shown in simply surviving. Even in the most humiliating moments, she had not given up. Breaths. She had endured pain that might have broken anyone else, and yet she remained. That realization slowly replaced shame with pride. She understood that her past struggles did not define her in a negative way. Rather, they had given her resilience, empathy, and courage. These were qualities that no one could take away from her. The humiliation she had suffered had been forced upon her, but the strength she was building now came from within. One important part of her growth was reclaiming her space in the community. Before, she had avoided public spaces, fearing judgment and ridicule. Now she began to attend small gatherings, volunteer for local events, and even help organize town activities. At first, it was terrifying. Every glance, every whisper seemed like it might reopen old wounds. But each time she pushed through the fear, she felt stronger. She realized that she could choose how she responded to the world. She did not have to shrink herself to fit others' expectations. Slowly, she learned to move with confidence, not arrogance, but quiet self-assurance that came from knowing her worth. Amina also began pursuing personal goals she had once thought impossible. She enrolled in classes she had been too afraid to attempt, started reading more about subjects that interested her, and even began keeping a journal of her thoughts and aspirations. But each small achievement was a victory against the years of self-doubt that had been imposed upon her. She discovered talents and skills she had never fully explored, and each new discovery brought excitement and hope for the future. She began to understand that her life was no longer defined by cruelty. It was defined by her own actions, decisions, and dreams. During this time, Rami continued to be a supportive presence in her life. He never pressured her or tried to control her journey. Instead, he offered guidance and encouragement when needed, and celebrated her achievements, no matter how small. Their relationship became a source of stability and trust. She knew that she could share her fears and doubts without fear of judgment, and that she could celebrate her successes without feeling guilty or undeserving. This kind of unconditional support was something she had never experienced before, and it became a cornerstone of her healing. Amina also began to notice the impact of her healing on others. Friends and neighbors who had once ignored her began to see a new side of her, a confident, intelligent, and kind young woman who was no longer afraid to claim her space in the world. Some were surprised and some were inspired. She realized that by standing tall and living authentically, she could influence the world around her in positive ways. Her courage became contagious, reminding others that strength often comes quietly and gradually through persistence and resilience. One particularly meaningful moment came when Amina decided to confront her past in a safe, controlled way. She returned to the market where she had been humiliated months before, not with anger, but with calm determination. She walked through the crowded area, feeling the eyes of the townspeople, and held her head high. Some whispered and some stared, but she no longer felt powerless. She had transformed the fear and shame she once carried into quiet confidence. In that moment, she realized that she had taken control of her own narrative. No longer a victim of public cruelty, she had become the author of her own story. Another important part of her healing was learning to be kind to herself. For years, Amina had been her harshest critic. She had internalized the cruel words of others, believing that she was unworthy or flawed.
Now she practiced self-compassion, reminding herself that she was deserving of respect, happiness, and love. She celebrated her progress, forgave herself for perceived failures, and acknowledged that healing was a journey, not a destination.
By treating herself with care, she built an inner strength that was unshakable, even when the world outside remained unpredictable. Amina's personal growth also inspired her to help others who faced cruelty or judgment. She began volunteering with local youth groups, sharing her experiences and offering guidance to those who struggled with self-esteem or bullying. By turning her own pain into a source of support for others, she discovered a profound sense of purpose. She realized that the challenges she had faced, while painful, had equipped her with empathy and wisdom that could benefit those around her. This act of giving back became a powerful part of her own healing process. Through all these experiences, Amina learned the importance of boundaries and self-respect. She recognized that while kindness and compassion were strengths, she did not have to tolerate mistreatment or ridicule. She learned to say no when necessary, to step away from toxic situations, and to surround herself with people who uplifted and supported her. These lessons gave her a sense of control over her life that she had never felt before. She understood that true confidence was not about pleasing others, but about honoring her own worth. By the end of this period, Amina had transformed significantly. She was still human, still vulnerable at times, but she had discovered a resilience that could not be shaken by the opinions of others. She had learned to trust, to hope, and to pursue her dreams with courage. She had also realized that healing was not a solitary journey. It was strengthened by support, compassion, and understanding from those who truly cared. In Rami, she had found a partner in this journey, someone who respected her autonomy while offering encouragement and stability. Together they navigated the path of recovery, learning from each other and growing stronger side by side.
Amina's journey of healing was not just personal. It began to affect the way she interacted with the world.
She started speaking up when she witnessed injustice, standing up for those who were treated unfairly and refusing to participate in gossip or cruelty. Her presence in the community became a quiet but powerful statement. She was no longer defined by others' judgments, and she would not allow cruelty to dictate her life. Her confidence inspired others to reconsider their own behavior, reminding the town that strength often comes from quiet resilience rather than loud confrontation. One night, as she reflected on her journey, Amina realized how far she had come. She thought about the girl who had once walked through the market with her head low, terrified of judgment, and she felt pride in the woman she had become. She knew that the road ahead would still have challenges, but she was no longer afraid. She had reclaimed her life, her dignity, and her voice. And she knew deep in her heart that this was only the beginning of a journey toward even greater strength, purpose, and fulfillment. In this part of her life, Amina discovered the true meaning of resilience. It was not about never falling, but about rising each time, stronger and wiser than before. She had learned that real strength was built through patience, trust, and perseverance. And perhaps most importantly, she realized that her past, while painful, had shaped her into a compassionate, courageous, and determined person who could face the world on her own terms. By the time Part 3 ended, Amina had grown into a young woman who had reclaimed control of her life. The fear, shame, and humiliation of her past no longer held power over her.
She had learned to trust, to hope, and to dream again.
And with Rami's steady support, she was ready to take the next steps, stepping fully into the world, facing those who had wronged her, and proving, not through anger, but through success, dignity, and courage, that she was unbreakable. Bait. After months of quiet healing and steady growth, Amina began to notice a new feeling stirring inside her, a sense of empowerment. She had survived humiliation, fear, and self-doubt, and in that survival she had discovered an inner strength that she had never known existed. Each small victory, from speaking up in public to pursuing her dreams, had accumulated into something much larger. She was no longer the timid, unsure girl who had walked through the market under the scornful gaze of others. She was becoming a young woman capable of facing the world with courage, dignity, and determination.
The first step in this transformation was fully embracing her identity.
Oh, for years, Amina had tried to hide parts of herself, adjusting to the expectations of others, shrinking her presence, and silencing her opinions. Now she decided that she would no longer apologize for who she was. She embraced her body, her intelligence, and her kindness, refusing to let anyone reduce her to a single cruel label. It was not about vanity or pride, it was about reclaiming the power that others had tried to take from her. Every time she looked in the mirror, she reminded herself that she was worthy, strong, and capable. With this renewed self-confidence, Amina also began focusing on her future. She set goals that once seemed impossible, dreaming bigger than she had dared before. She planned to continue her education, explore new opportunities in the city, and even start small projects to help other young women who faced bullying or judgment. She realized that her experiences, though painful, had given her a unique perspective and a strong voice, one that could inspire and empower others. The thought of turning her pain into purpose filled her with hope and motivation. But at the same time, Amina began preparing to confront the injustice she had endured. Not with anger or revenge, but with clarity, courage, and dignity. She understood that the people who had humiliated her had acted cruelly, but that their actions would only have power over her if she allowed them. She decided she would face them not as a victim, but as a strong, confident woman who had survived, healed, and grown. Boo. This decision was not easy. It required courage to step into the spaces where she had once felt powerless. But with each step she felt the weight of fear lighten, replaced by determination and resolve. Brave Arami continued to be her steady companion through this journey. He never rushed her or tried to take control. Instead, he offered guidance and support whenever she needed it. Together they discussed strategies for handling confrontations, ways to assert her dignity, and how to remain calm under pressure. He reminded her that her strength did not need validation from others. It was inherent, born from her resilience and her willingness to rise despite adversity. With his support, Amina felt braver, ready to reclaim not only her dignity, but her place in the world. As Amina prepared herself, she also began building her skills and knowledge. She took courses that enhanced her confidence and competence, learning skills that would help her in her personal and professional life. She practiced public speaking, learned how to advocate for herself, and studied ways to address conflict respectfully and effectively. Every new skill added to her sense of empowerment. She began to feel that she could navigate the world on her own terms, and that the opinions of those who had once mocked her no longer held sway over her decisions. One significant part of her journey involved reconnecting with her community on her own terms. She started volunteering at local events, helping organize youth programs, and participating in projects that encouraged kindness, inclusion, and respect. Through these efforts, she not only regained a sense of belonging, but also demonstrated her strength and resilience to others. People began to notice the change in her, not the girl they had once judged, but a confident, intelligent, and capable young woman who had overcome adversity. The transformation inspired admiration and in some cases reflection among those who had once laughed at her. Alongside these efforts, Amina learned the power of forgiveness, not to excuse the cruelty she had faced, but to free herself from its weight. She realized that carrying anger and resentment could hold her back, whereas focusing on her growth and her future allowed her to rise above the past. Forgiveness became a tool of empowerment, a way to reclaim peace and focus on the life she wanted to build. She understood that confronting injustice did not require cruelty or revenge. It required strength, clarity, and self-respect. Amina also began to think strategically about how she could confront the people who had wronged her, should the need arise, but she envisioned a future where she could stand tall in front of them, not with threats or anger, but with confidence and dignity. She imagined addressing them with calmness and intelligence, showing that their cruelty had not broken her, but had instead made her stronger. But the idea of reclaiming her narrative, of showing that she could rise above humiliation, became a motivating force. During this period, Amina's relationship with Rami grew even stronger. Their bond was built on mutual respect, understanding, and shared vision. He became a source of encouragement, reminding her that she was not alone, and that her journey, though personal, could inspire others. They spoke often about values, goals, and dreams, and he supported her in taking concrete steps toward achieving them. Together they formed a partnership based on trust, empowerment, and shared resilience. Amina realized that having someone who genuinely believed in her potential made her feel more capable of facing any challenge. Amina also started mentoring younger girls in her town who were struggling with self-esteem and bullying.
She shared her story in a safe and encouraging way, showing them that strength was not about avoiding hardship, but about rising through it. The act of helping others became an extension of her own healing.
She discovered that when she lifted others up, she reinforced her own courage, confidence, and resilience. The admiration and gratitude she received from those she mentored reinforced her belief that personal growth and empowerment could ripple outward, touching the lives of others. As she gained confidence, Amina began envisioning her long-term goals with clarity. She dreamed of moving beyond her small town to explore the world, to gain experiences that would broaden her perspective and deepen her understanding of herself and others. She set academic and personal milestones for herself, understanding that each step forward was part of reclaiming control over her life. Every action she took, whether it was learning a new skill, helping someone in need, or speaking up for herself, contributed to building the life she envisioned. By the end of this period, Amina had become someone unrecognizable to the girl she had been months before. She was confident without arrogance, strong without cruelty, and compassionate without weakness. She had faced the darkness of humiliation and fear, and she had emerged not just unbroken, but empowered. Her growth was visible not only to herself but to those around her. People who had once doubted her began to see her strength, her wisdom, and her dignity. First, her journey became a quiet testament to the power of resilience, courage, and self-belief. Yet even as she flourished, Amina never forgot the past that had shaped her. She remembered the market, the laughter, and the humiliation, not with anger, but with clarity. She understood that those moments had been pivotal, teaching her lessons about herself, the world, and the strength she could summon when she refused to let cruelty define her. And in that clarity she found not only healing but also preparation for the next chapter, facing those who had wronged her, reclaiming her story, and showing the world the full measure of her strength and dignity. By the time Part 4 ended, Amina was ready. She was no longer the girl who had been humiliated, fearful, and uncertain. She was a young woman with a plan, a vision, and a determination to rise above injustice without compromising her values. She had grown, she had learned, and she had prepared herself to face the world with courage and poise. And as she looked forward, she knew that the journey ahead, though challenging, would be met with the strength, wisdom, and resilience she had cultivated through every trial she had endured. By the time the final chapter of Amina's journey began, she was no longer the frightened girl who had walked through the market with her head down, trembling under the scornful eyes of the crowd. She had transformed into a confident, strong, and determined young woman. The months of healing, learning, and growing had built a foundation so solid that no cruel word, judgment, or past humiliation could shake her. Bet. Amina now understood the true meaning of strength. It was not about proving herself to those who had hurt her, but about proving to herself that she could rise, thrive, and live on her own terms. The people who had once mocked her still existed in her town, still whispering and casting judgmental glances, but Amina no longer feared them. She walked through the streets with her head held high, her posture and presence speaking louder than any words could. When they noticed her, some were surprised, others uneasy, and a few quietly ashamed.
The girl they had once laughed at now radiated confidence, intelligence, and dignity.
She had taken back the power that had been taken from her, not through anger or vengeance, but through courage, perseverance, and self-respect. Amina's first step toward reclaiming her narrative was to share her story publicly. She organized a small gathering in the community center, inviting young women and men, neighbors, and anyone willing to listen. She spoke openly about the humiliation she had faced, the struggles of growing up under judgment, and the journey she had undertaken to rebuild herself. Her words were honest and heartfelt, and they carried a weight that demanded attention. She did not speak to shame others, but to inspire them, to show that even in the face of cruelty, it was possible to rise stronger. As she spoke, the crowd listened, some with tears in their eyes, others with quiet admiration. People began to realize that the girl they had once mocked was someone remarkable. She had faced adversity and emerged not broken, but resilient, compassionate, and empowered. Her story became a mirror for the community, showing the consequences of cruelty and the power of empathy and respect. Those who had once laughed at her were confronted, silently, by the undeniable evidence of her growth and dignity. Amina had reclaimed her story, and in doing so, she had also reshaped the perception of others. Beyond sharing her story, Amina focused on tangible achievements. She pursued education with dedication, excelling in her studies and gaining recognition for her intelligence and hard work. She volunteered with local programs that helped girls and young women build self-esteem, teaching them the lessons she had learned through experience. Each act of service, each accomplishment became a form of payback that did not involve revenge but instead demonstrated her strength and resilience. She was living proof that personal growth and success were far more powerful than humiliation and cruelty. Amina also embraced opportunities beyond her town. She applied for scholarships, explored new cities, and sought experiences that would broaden her horizons. With each step, she felt the freedom of moving beyond the constraints of judgment and fear. She realized that the world was far bigger than the small town where she had once felt trapped, and that her potential was limitless. Her journey had taught her that the only limits that truly mattered were those she allowed herself to accept. Through it all, Rami remained a supportive partner. He celebrated her victories, encouraged her dreams, and reminded her of her strength whenever doubt crept in. Their relationship, founded on mutual respect and understanding, became a source of stability and empowerment. With his support, Amina learned that achieving success and reclaiming dignity was not a solitary endeavor. True empowerment could be strengthened through meaningful connections with people who genuinely cared and believed in her. As time passed, Amina's life became a symbol of hope for others who faced cruelty or judgment. Young women in the town began to seek her guidance, inspired by her courage and achievements. They saw that obstacles could be overcome with perseverance and self-belief. She mentored them, sharing practical advice and emotional support, showing them that they too could rise above the limitations others tried to impose on them. In helping others, Amina realized that her own journey of healing and empowerment had a purpose beyond herself. She was creating a ripple effect of courage, confidence, and dignity. Eventually, the people who had once mocked her began to feel the impact of her transformation. They saw that their cruelty had failed to break her, and in some cases had inadvertently strengthened her. There was no confrontation, no public humiliation of them in return. Instead, Amina's success, confidence, and influence were enough to demonstrate that the true measure of a person's worth was found in character, perseverance, and resilience. Pay. Her life had become the ultimate payback, not through revenge, but through undeniable achievement and dignity. One significant moment came when she returned to the market where she had been humiliated long ago.
This time, she walked through confidently, smiling at familiar faces. Some remembered her from that day, some did not.
But it no longer mattered. She had stepped into a space that once caused fear and shame and transformed it into a place of empowerment. People who had once laughed now saw a woman whose life, presence, and energy commanded respect. Amina understood that payback was not about forcing others to feel guilt. It was about living fully, fearlessly, and successfully in spite of them. As her journey progressed, Amina also embraced personal happiness. She cultivated friendships, explored her passions, and nurtured a life that brought her joy. She understood that success was not measured solely by achievement, but by fulfillment, self-respect, and emotional well-being. Every day she lived with confidence, purpose, and compassion, reinforcing the lessons she had learned. That strength comes from perseverance, dignity comes from self-respect, and true power comes from rising above cruelty, rather than being consumed by it. Looking back, Amina realized how far she had come. The girl who had once walked trembling and humiliated had become a woman capable of inspiring, leading, and empowering others. Difficult, but every step had contributed to her growth. She had faced fear, endured pain, and embraced resilience. She had learned the value of self-belief, the importance of support from genuine people, and the power of turning adversity into strength. By the end of her story, Amina had achieved a life filled with dignity, purpose, and influence. Her payback was complete, not through cruelty or revenge, but through success, confidence, and compassion. She had demonstrated to the world and to herself that the opinions of those who sought to belittle her could never define her. She had reclaimed her life, her self-worth, and her voice. She had proven that resilience and character are far more powerful than judgment and mockery. In the final reflection of her journey, Amina smiled, not with arrogance or pride, but with quiet strength and satisfaction. She had faced the darkest moments of humiliation and fear and had risen above them. She had found love, support, and partnership. She had created a life of meaning, success, and empowerment. And most importantly, she had learned that true payback is not about punishing others. It is about building a life so strong, so full, and so inspiring that the world cannot ignore your worth.
Amina's story became a legacy.
A story told to inspire others, to remind them that even when life seems cruel and people seem unkind, there is always hope, resilience, and a path to empowerment. She had proven that strength is built through courage, dignity, and perseverance.
She had shown that the only limits that matter are the ones we accept, and that the most meaningful triumphs are those that transform not just our own lives, but the lives of others around us.
And in that way, Amina's life became the ultimate testament to the power of rising above adversity, reclaiming self-respect, and turning past pain into a future filled with hope, success, and dignity. The girl who had been mocked and humiliated had become a woman whose story would inspire generations, showing that the strongest, most lasting payback is living a life that reflects courage, resilience, and unwavering self-worth.